Perfect Holiday by Michael Bainbrook. It was a picture-perfect evening. Corey Sarkati lowered her glass and surveyed the room. 18 round tables filled to capacity, black napkins folded and placed in a precise way on ivory tablecloths, orchids in a white amethyst vase, and vintage chandeliers turned down to a candlelight glow. At the front of the room was a 5-string quartet playing Schubert in G major. It was also exquisite. As long as Corey had been involved with the charity, they'd always held their functions at the Despain Manor, a refurbished mansion from the early 1900s turned bed and breakfast and reception center, and it had worked out every time. $500 a plate and no one blinked. The spring soiree was one of 3 benefits they held every year. A 4-man golf scramble in the summer and a Dear Widow's luncheon in October kept their program fueled, but this was the big one. The money they took in that night would support more than 100 college scholarships in developing countries such as Honduras, Botswana, and Indonesia. She had often thought about traveling to some of these countries and meeting with the recipients personally, documenting how their lives had been changed. It was one of these days kind of thing. But for now, she was happy working at this end. It was her year to be in charge, and it was going off without a hitch. The perfect choice to ask people for money, Corey was smart and beautiful. She had a reputation around the Salt Lake area as a cunning, but lovable estate planning attorney. And she was a little bit of a workaholic. She enjoyed the pace and the pressure of work, and she enjoyed fussing over her clients. In the past, they'd come from as far away as Australia to meet with her. She sat at a table between 2 women who made up her committee. Gina was blonde and thin, her long tan legs sprouting beautifully from beneath a short black skirt. Lucy had chestnut brown hair and a dark rose-colored dress that displayed her ample cleavage. Corey's dress was lavender, stopping at the knees, less form-fitting, not as low-cut. She was the thinker of the group, a role that she'd accepted and cultivated. Apart from their charity, the 3 of them did little together, which suited Corey just fine. She would get out of breath just listening to them talk about their fast-paced social lives. Besides, she knew her husband was the real attention-getter here. Congressman Mitch Sarkati. It wouldn't be long and either Gina or Lucy would ask about him, and she would have to disappoint them again. He'd been in D.C. all week and wasn't expected home until late that night. Sorry, girls. When the music ended, Corey followed Gina and Lucy to the bar. The girls got their drinks and quickly disappeared into a crowd of men, like squirrels into the brush. Corey ordered a Diet Coke with lime and turned toward the room. At 48, with thick dark hair, Corey was 3rd-generation Japanese-American. She grew up in Northern California where she lived with her parents and brother Tenjiro. Her great-grandmother had been the first in her family to come to America, immigrating to San Francisco in the early 1900s. Corey was 3 when she passed away and had only faint memories of her. When Corey's mother died a few years later, her grandparents sold their home in Redding and moved in with them in Mendocino. By now, her grandmother, who everyone called Obasan, had outlived her husband and Corey's father, living almost 10 years in the house alone. Corey's thoughts temporarily circled around her daughter's swim meet. She didn't typically miss a competition, but with the benefit dinner that night she'd had no choice. She tried to remember if the meet was home or away. Away could mean across town or across the state. With her mind going, she didn't notice a man approach her until he cleared his throat. "Diet Coke?" he asked, motioning to her drink. Corey shortened her sip and met the man's gaze. "Can I get you a drink with more zip?" "No thanks. I'm married?" She smiled. "I was gonna say working." Not real tall, the man had thinning brown hair that had been gathered into a short ponytail, a number of tattoos on his arms, various string and leather bracelets, and a small silver hoop earring in one ear. Her first thought was that he'd gone through a lot of trouble to make himself look interesting and had failed miserably. "You probably don't remember me?" "No, I'm sorry. We've done some business together, he said, sinking his hands into his pockets. Her brow furrowed as she tried to place him. You set up a living trust for my father. Who's your father? The one and only Mr. Montgomery Krause. The man held out his arms to the room in mock grandeur. I'm Cameron, by the way. Corey Sarkati. While Corey extended her hand to him, she inadvertently located Mr. Krause in the room. She knew the man well. Not only was he a client, but he was a major supporter of the charity, and she quickly recalled the work she'd done for him, as she customarily did of all her clients when she needed to. Montgomery had labored over his kids and their piece of the estate and had decided to omit some of them, at least temporarily, for their own good. From the man's demeanor, she imagined that he was one of them that got the shaft. Cameron motioned to one of the bartenders for a beer and took a long pull. The famous Sarkatis. Well, at least one of us is famous. He seemed amused by that. So is it working out for you, the trust? She pretended to be clueless. Cameron set his mouth into a flat, tight line. You cut me out, lady. You cut me out of $1 billion pie. Hearing the bite in his tone, Corey glanced quickly at two of her colleagues, Neil and Andrew, who were talking not too far away. I didn't cut you out of anything. You put it on paper? I wrote it up as per your father's instructions, that's all. Yeah, well, my father hates me. Corey watched his countenance cave in when he said it. Maybe he just wanted to do what's best for you. He rotated his bottle in his hands. I've been clean for 6 months. That's a good start, Corey encouraged. Your father will be glad to hear that. They were both silent for a moment. Corey wanted to leave, but she almost felt some sick sense of duty to make sure he was okay before walking away. But she had work to do. I hope you'll excuse me as I need to attend to the guests. Cameron watched her pass him. You know it's funny? What's funny? She said, turning to him one more time. I expected you to be more. He chose his next words carefully. Forgiving of people that make mistakes. At that moment, Gina and Lucy materialized next to her. What do you mean? Corey asked. He smiled. Don't you watch the news?
A.J. Crawford lowered a bowl from the cupboard, and after filling it with cereal and milk, walked his breakfast out to the patio. The sliding of the glass door woke Pearl, a golden Labrador, who raised her blonde head. Hey girl, A.J. said as he took a seat at a small patio table. He ate, then set the bowl on the deck for Pearl to finish. Back inside, he watched as a truck approached, water splashing beneath a '72 Chevy short bed and hitting the hot engine, sending steam swirling in its wake. Brooks honked as he circled past the house, then positioned the truck inches away from a horse trailer. The dogs were in their kennels in the back, barking like crazy, and as soon as Brooks came to a stop, Tim hopped out. Hush dogs! Tim yelled. Before joining them, A.J. pulled a Smith & Wesson .357 and a box of shells from his gun safe. Then he emerged from the house, with only one arm in his coat, slinging the door closed behind him. Pearl ran ahead of him, her small yips of excitement diverting the attention of the hounds. At 50, A.J. had dark, slightly wavy hair with a little gray mixed in, deep-set hazel eyes, and a smile that broke effortlessly. He'd been a gym rat most of his life and was still in pretty good shape for a guy his age. More than anything, he loved spending time with his two best friends, when they weren't trying to set him up on a date, that is. About time you boys showed up. Have to work for the wives before you could play with the guys? You know how it is, dude, Brooks said. Gotta keep the little woman happy. Brooks grinned like a gigolo in an all-woman army, but A.J. knew the truth, which was that Brooks probably had to fix a window screen or change the oil in Linda's car before he could leave. Yeah, I know how it is, A.J. smirked. So when are you gonna get you a woman? Tim asked. Well, hell, Tim, now that you mention it, I'll just go down to Bubba's Food Town and pick one out. AJ felt for his hunting knife and patted his pocket for his cell phone. To their credit, it had been a while since they tried to set him up, so Tim's comment didn't upset him as much as it usually did. "You forget where we live, Timbo," AJ continued. "There aren't a lot of single women my age around here to choose from." "Then go up north." "City chicks?" Brooks laughed. "They're chicks, aren't they? I don't think they'd come down here, and I'm sure as heck not moving up there. Besides, it's not like I'm locked away in my house eating TV dinners. The way I see it, if it happens, it happens." "What about that Happy Hearts thing?" Tim reminded him. AJ's mouth started to curl into a smile until he quashed it. Total disaster. Brooks and Tim both waited in silence. "I'm sure your wives are gonna want a play-by-play as well, so I'll save it for later. But let me just put it this way for now. After Happy Hearts, I'm happier just forgetting about women altogether." As AJ passed the corral, Tim threw him a ding-dong which he caught one-handed against his chest. "Who needs a wife anyway when I've got Timbo here?" AJ's words caused Tim to smile like a little girl in a new Easter dress. "He loves me. He gives me food." AJ held out both arms. "What else does a guy need?" Finally getting his other arm in his coat, AJ pulled up to the back of Brooks's truck, unwrapping his ding-dong. "Did you bring the cooler?" "Yep." "The big one this time?" AJ asked through cake and cream. "The big one," Brooks confirmed. "Good." Filling his cheeks with air, Brooks bent down and lifted on the neck of the trailer, positioning it over the hitch. While Brooks locked it down, AJ walked over to the barn and swung open the door. Tim materialized next to him, joining him as they stared inside. "So what are we taking today?" Tim asked. AJ took another bite. "Timbo, today we're taking the good stuff." AJ had been around horses all his life. When he was just a kid, he started a horse care business that included watering, feeding, and brushing, even a little training, and eventually shoeing. Within a year, he had earned enough money to buy his own horse. He continued his business until he left for college. A few years ago, AJ took all the money he could get his hands on and bought 30 acres, building a barn, a corral, and a training facility. He advertised as kind of a horse daycare that could handle up to 32 head. He stabled the animals during the week and the owners would come down from the city to ride them on the weekends. With the trailer secure, AJ started directing traffic, pointing with what was left of his ding-dong. "We're gonna take this buckskin mare here, the chestnut girl there, and for you, Tim, the spirited brown and white pinto at the end." "Great. I love a horse with spunk," Tim said. "You have a lot in common," AJ said, putting his hand on Tim's shoulder. "His name is Gasser." Passing Tim as he walked the mare into the trailer, Brooks grinned and shook his head. "Just stay downwind from me," he warned. Then he closed an interior gate, separating the mare from the others. A beefy-faced man, Brooks had a wide neck. A thick mustache curled over his top lip, and his voice was so deep it seemed to travel for miles. "And let's make this quick. I'd like to get out of here before Linda calls and needs something." He looked at AJ as he exited the trailer. "I accidentally left my cell at home, if you know what I mean." In the next few minutes, the other two horses were loaded and the trailer doors were closed. Dropping his arms to his sides, Brooks sighed a breath that hung in the morning air like cotton. "Look, I know what you're thinking, man. You're thinking Linda's got me in her back pocket. Well, maybe she does, but let me tell you a few things about being married, amigo. It's called a relationship, and in a relationship..." But AJ raised a hand to stop him right then and there. "Are you seriously gonna start giving me marriage advice? I thought we were about to do guy stuff." Brooks looked put out at him for interrupting. The thing is, AJ had heard it all before. And their argument was always the same, that it had been 3 years since Kelly died, and if he would just put some effort into it, he could find happiness again, and the loneliness he felt would be gone, and yada yada yada. It was all ridiculous. He knew the truth. And the truth was that it could never be as good or as right as it was with Kelly. There'd been magic at the Big O tire store the day they met. Pure magic. Magic twice? Not likely. I'll trade you places, Tim said as he hoisted a saddle into the back of the truck, grunting. You can be married and I'll be single for a while. AJ rolled his eyes at him, knowing that if Charlotte heard him say that, he'd be apologizing for a week. Look guys, let's just get this crap loaded and hit the road. We've got lions to tree, and steaks and a hot tub waiting for us when we get back. Now that sounds a lot better than finding me a date, doesn't it? Sure that he'd made a good point, he put a hand on Tim's head and rubbed, messing up his hair. You got another ding-dong Timbo? Reaching into the cab of the truck for a bag of goodies that Charlotte had sent with him, Tim pulled out another tin-foiled treat and tossed it to him. As AJ took a bite, he closed his eyes and moaned in appreciation like a dog getting an overdue belly scratch. Now that's a good ding-dong boys. He took another bite and pointed at them. If you guys can find me a woman as good as a ding-dong, by all means, get me her number.